Okay.
Okay, welcome to Think for Yourself Clubhouse. One more time, and we're with Allison Russo, candidate for Ohio Secretary of State. Allison, when I was a kid, I thought the Secretary of State handled diplomatic relations among the various states, and I find out now that that is not so. Can you help me? What is it that the Ohio Secretary of State does with respect especially to elections and voting?
Yeah, so the Ohio Secretary of State is the state's chief elections officer, unlike the U.S. Secretary of State. So the chief elections officer, so the primary job is to conduct fair, free, secure elections in partnership with all 88 of our county boards of elections. So where the rubber really meets the road in our election administration is actually with our county boards of elections and our elections officials at the county level. But the Secretary of State, the job is to make sure that there are resources, that there's clear guidance, that there's consistency and transparency in how our elections are conducted. And in my opinion, the Secretary of State should also be the top advocate for voters, no matter who they vote for, what issue they support in the state of Ohio.
So part of the job is just being an elections techie.
That's right. I mean, really it should be a nonpartisan job. Politics shouldn't enter into it at all, because the job is to make sure that every single eligible Ohioan is able to have their voice heard in terms of what their government looks like, who represents them, whether it be at school board, city council, in Columbus, in Washington, that everyone, if they are eligible, that they have a seat at the table and that they have a voice in what that looks like.
How serious a problem is voter fraud in Ohio?
Well, first of all, there is no evidence of either widespread voter fraud or even small amounts of voter fraud. And we know this because the Secretary of State himself, who is a Republican, and his predecessor, who is also a Republican, we have very extensive audits that happen in our election process. And the accuracy is 99.999+% accuracy. There have been multiple analyses of does widespread voter fraud exist. It absolutely does not. You may occasionally have, one or two cases every couple of years. And catching that is good. We do not want voter fraud. Voter fraud is bad, but we can't overcorrect the system so that we are also excluding thousands of voters from the process to catch maybe one or two bad actors every few years.
Then why do the Republicans make such a big heat of it?
Well, in my opinion, I think they do it because we have a president of the United States right now who refuses to accept that he lost the 2020 election. And the explanation for that in his mind is that there was widespread voter fraud. There was not, and we know that. This has been litigated over 60 times. There was not widespread voter fraud, and it is very clear that the President of the United States is going to struggle to hold on to the power of Congress, in this 2026 election cycle because his policies are not popular. He is no longer popular. And so if you throw out arguments of voter fraud, that means that some Republicans and state legislatures like Ohio will pass laws that make it harder for people to actually have a say in our election process.
So that all stems from Trump's shenanigans?
I believe that is where it comes from.
I've got one more question here. It seems to me when Aggie and I were working on gerrymandering, there was an issue on the ballot to try to get a constitutional amendment to fix it. And we were not at all happy with the way the ballot language was on the ballot, so that the individual voter could read that ballot language and be inclined to do something you didn't really want to do if you're talking about it.
Right.
It's because of the misleading ballot language. Does the Secretary of State have any role in that ballot language?
Yeah, so one of the roles of the Secretary of State is to serve on what's known as the ballot board, the state's ballot board. So when you have these initiatives come forward, whether they come from the legislature to go to the ballot or they come from citizens after they've collected those petitions, the Secretary of State, number one, determines, is that single subject or multiple subjects? That's the first part. on the ballot board. And the ballot board also then determines the language that voters see when they come into the voting booth and what they read. And what we've seen from this Secretary of State is using that position as the chair of the ballot board to influence the language so that it is confusing. He did it obviously in 2024 with the redistricting reform that came forward.
Was that the Secretary of State at that time?
Yes, Secretary LaRose. As the chairman of the ballot board. But he actually did it even before that. He did it in November of 2023 as well for the Reproductive Rights Amendment, tried to mess around with the language also. And so, listen, the role of the Secretary of State is to give these ballot initiatives a fair shot. And what I mean by that is, it should not matter if a Secretary of State agrees or disagrees with the ballot issue, personally, what their opinion. What should matter is, do the citizens of Ohio have a fair shot in the process? Whether it's making sure there is fair, easy to read, simple ballot language for voters to see when they go in the voting booth so that they're not confused. When we do those signature collections and the certification process, it's ultimately the Secretary of State who decides what signatures are certified or not. The campaign financing of these ballot initiatives and making sure the Secretary of State doesn't put his or her thumb on the scale to upend a campaign because of that power, and also access to the ballot and making sure that Ohioans have their voices heard when these issues come forward. So I always say, it doesn't matter to me what issues the citizens are bringing forward. If they follow the laws and the rules to get that on the ballot, my job as Secretary of State is to give it a fair shot.
Fairly portray the issue.
That's right.
Last question. How long have you spent in the state legislature?
So I'm in my 8th year in the legislature. I was elected in 2018. I flipped a seat from Republican to Democrat and started serving in 2019.
And you've had leadership positions.
That's right. I served as the House Minority Leader, which simply meant I was the top Democrat in the Ohio House. I did that for 3.5 years and just stepped down this past June so that I could run statewide. And still serving in the legislature, just not serving as the House Minority Leader.
Okay, viewers, here we have a Democrat politician, statesperson, who's been kicking around Columbus for a long time, knows about Columbus, knows about state government, and you heard her answer the question. She knows her stuff about the office that she's trying to get in. So let's give her a fair shot like she wants to give the rest of us.
That's right.
Thank you.